Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Thursday, everybody. First up, we continue with our ongoing coverage of how Beijing is reacting to the Israel-Hamas conflict, including how it's being debated and presented within China itself. Let us move through salient developments from the last few days. So far, official messaging from Beijing has had a few key components. 1. Calls for immediate ceasefire and peace. 2. Calls for a two-state solution. 3. A fence-sitting stance whereby neither side is criticized. And 4. Like with Ukraine, blaming the conflict on the US-led West. On Tuesday, Zhai Jun, PRC Special Envoy for the Middle East, told an Egyptian official that, quote, the fundamental solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict lies in implementing the two-state solution, and China is willing to promote an immediate ceasefire and cessation of violence and to provide humanitarian support to the Palestinian people, end quote. The following day, Wednesday, Zhai Jun had a call with the Palestinian Deputy Foreign Minister. According to the Chinese readout, Zhai said that, quote, China is deeply pained by the escalation of the current conflict between Palestine and Israel, which has caused many innocent civilian casualties, and is deeply concerned about the severe deterioration of the security and humanitarian situation in Palestine. The urgent task is to cease fire immediately and protect civilians. The international community should play a practical role, jointly promote the de-escalation of the situation, and provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, end quote. The Palestinian side, quote, thanked China for its long-standing just stance on the Palestinian issue, end quote. The readout made no mention of the Hamas attacks. Let us now move through some coverage of this conflict as it is being discussed in state media and by Chinese academics as well as within popular discourse, to get a sense of Beijing's elite views on the conflict and its wider geopolitical implications, as well as how it's being presented to regular Chinese through media. There has been a lot written in recent days, but the following excerpts should give us a fairly representative taste of the nature of the discourse in Beijing, as well as key themes. Quote, the Palestinian issue has historically been viewed by the global community as the most important, sensitive, and fundamental problem in the Middle East. But in order to achieve reconciliation between Israel and Saudi Arabia and persuade more of its friends and other moderate nations to establish diplomatic ties with Israel, the US strives to sidestep or even ignore the Palestinian issue. Its goal is to put together a united front to attack Syria and suppress Iran. The US should reflect its regional strategy and advocate for long-term solutions to Israel-Palestine conflict rather than stoking tensions, end quote. And, quote, the United States has condemned Hamas's attack as a terrorist attack and said that Israel has the right to defend its interests and that America is willing to provide Israel with all the help it needs. In reality, this kind of statement is largely about supporting them morally. As far as Israel is concerned, if it wants to carry out airstrikes on Gaza, or if it wants to launch a full-scale, on-the-ground incursion into Gaza, it has enough military power to do so on its own. So the US's posture is, to a large extent, symbolic, moral support at the political level. Of course, the US's overwhelming support for Israel is not helpful for the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The root cause of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, ultimately, the absence of a Palestinian state. That is to say, Israel's long-standing military control over Palestinian territory and the Palestinian people is the most fundamental cause of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, end quote. The anti-US sentiment is a strong and common theme throughout the Chinese coverage. Quote, the US is stoking the fire. The US's reconciliation strategy in the Middle East is unjust and unreasonable to Palestine because of its strong backing for Israel. Many global and regional powers, including China, Russia, and Arab countries, are trying to help diffuse tensions, since more casualties and a more catastrophic humanitarian situation are not what the international community wants to see, end quote. Varying degrees of anti-Semitism has also been prevalent in discourse, especially in popular discourse online. Nationalist commentator Ziwu Xiashi, with 1 million followers on Weibo, wrote this week, quote, in the past, Germany persecuted you, now you persecute Palestinians, end quote. One reply with thousands of likes expressed, quote, Jews always talk about how bad they are treated during World War II and throughout history, but you can't ask why, otherwise you're called a racist or that you envy their money." End quote. Another commented, quote, "It's really the fault of that little moustached man," here referring to Hitler. "If he had killed all of them, you wouldn't have this much trouble today." End quote. This week, the account run by the Israeli embassy in China had to close off its comments section after thousands of angry netizens left comments. And it's not just popular commentators flirting with these themes either. On Tuesday, a Weibo account run by state-run China Central Television, one of the big three broadcasters in the country, ran a report touching on how Jews, quote, "have the most financial power in American politics," end quote. Soon after, the hashtag, quote, "the 3% Jewish population of the US control over 70% of American wealth," end quote, became one of the top trending topics on Weibo. Next up, Australia-China relations and the Chinese economy. If you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing are all big helps for the channel. And for anyone who can go the extra mile, as always, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. This is the best way to help me continue making China Update and keep it primarily subscriber supported. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, Australian citizen Cheng Lei has returned to Melbourne, Australia, after more than 3 years, 1,154 days of detention in China, in what some are calling a diplomatic coup for Canberra, and others a goodwill gesture from Beijing to smooth the way for the Australian Prime Minister's visit to the PRC later this year. Cheng was born in China, but migrated to Australia at the age of 10, where she then grew up. Cheng had worked as a news anchor for Chinese state-run broadcaster CGTN for more than a decade when she was detained by Chinese security officials in August 2020. A source familiar with Cheng's condition told Australian media outlet The Australian that she was, quote, "in good health and good spirits," end quote, with the outlet reporting that Canberra learned only in the past fortnight of a deal that would allow her release. The Prime Minister's office in Australia told media this week that Cheng's release followed meetings with Xi Jinping on the sidelines of last year's G20 summit in Bali and with Premier Li Qiang at the Asian meeting in Jakarta last month. Analysts agree that Cheng's release is a positive sign for stabilizing Australian-China relations during a time of great tensions. Quote, "Every single Australian politician, from the Prime Minister down, every diplomat, every scholarly or business intermediary who's met with the Chinese in recent years has raised Cheng Lei's case and made it clear that the two countries' relationship wouldn't be back on a solid footing until it was resolved. The timing is pretty obviously related to the Prime Minister's visit and an effort by the Chinese to put it on a solid foundation." End quote. The deal for her release involved Cheng pleading guilty to the vague state secrets charges that Beijing has made against her, which Canberra, quote, "has long viewed as trumped up and politically motivated," end quote, in the words of outlet The Australian. In its official statement, China's Ministry of State Security expressed the following on Cheng's release. Quote, "In May 2020, Cheng Lei was approached by a person from a foreign institution and violated the confidentiality agreement signed with her employer by illegally providing content classified as national secrets, which she had access to through her work, to this foreign institution via her mobile phone. The Beijing Municipal Bureau of National Security opened an investigation and took criminal coercive measures against Cheng Lei in August 2020 in accordance with the law. After her case was filed, Cheng Lei truthfully confessed her criminal acts and voluntarily accepted her guilt and punishment. The Beijing No. 2 Intermediate People's Court, after an open trial, sentenced Cheng Lei to 2 years and 11 months in prison for illegally providing state secrets to foreign entities, with additional deportation. The Chinese judicial authorities strictly handled the case in accordance with the law, fully safeguarding all the rights Cheng Lei is entitled to under the law." End quote. The Chinese-Australian writer Yang Hangjun was arrested in January 2019 and also charged with espionage. Canberra said on Wednesday that it continues to advocate for Yang too. Okay, and finally for today's video, calls are being made for a stock market bailout after China's sovereign wealth fund, state-owned Central Huijin Investments Limited, bought a modest amount of bank shares. The state-owned sovereign wealth fund bought about $65 million worth of stocks in the 4 biggest state-owned banks, something it has done in the past during stock market downturns. The amount is small, but does send a signal that the government may be coming to prop up the stock market. China's stock market has disappointed this year, greatly underperforming versus many of its peers. A growing number of Chinese economists and hedge funds are calling on the government to directly intervene with a stabilization fund to buy stocks. For example, on Tuesday evening this week, Li Bei, outspoken founder of Shanghai Banxia Investment Management Center, a large fund manager with a strong record but doing very poorly this year, returning 169% over the last 5 years but down 7.8% so far this year, posted a widely shared article calling for the state to intervene to prop up the market. Li argued that the top priority for policymakers is to rebuild confidence among investors, expressing, quote, "The key is to break the harm declines in asset prices are doing to citizens and their confidence. The vicious cycle has taken hold and policies need to be more forceful now to cut off the circulation quickly." End quote. And now with this modest stock purchase from Huijin, maybe this will happen. Quote, "Central Huijin's modest but symbolic investments are very likely aimed at supporting share prices. This move, reminiscent of its actions during the 2015 Chinese equity market turmoil, signifies the government's desire to maintain market stability." End quote. The sovereign wealth fund does have a history of intervening during times of extreme turbulence, buying stocks after bubbles burst in 2008 and 2015. Quote, "The purchase of big 4 bank shares by Huijin feels like deja vu and reminds people of the old playbook to save the market by regulators back in 2008 and 2015. End quote. However, Chen warns that this time, much like how the market has not responded strongly to government support for property, Beijing may not be able to trigger a strong rally in the Chinese stock market, expressing, quote, "China macro fundamentals are now the major driver for the bottoming out of the stock market in the current environment." End quote. With that being said then, it is hard to know exactly when this bottoming out will occur. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.